The waitress froze the moment she saw my son. Her smile faded, and the tray in her hands started to shake. At first, I thought maybe she was just tired or recognized us from somewhere, but then she whispered something that made my stomach twist. She said, "He looks just like the boy who vanished here 10 years ago." My name is Claire Dawson, and that was the moment my normal life took a turn I could never explain. I wasn't the kind of person who believed in ghost stories or coincidences that meant something deeper. I was just a single mom trying to raise my son and give him a peaceful life. But that day at the diner, everything changed. It started as a normal Saturday. My 8-year-old son, Ethan, and I were driving back home after visiting my parents in another town. The drive was long, and by late afternoon, we were both hungry and tired. We spotted a little place off the highway called Hayes Family Diner, one of those small, old-fashioned restaurants that looked like they hadn't changed in decades. A red neon open sign flickered in the window, and the parking lot had only a few cars. I figured it would be a quiet spot to grab something to eat before finishing the drive. When we walked in, the smell of apple pie and coffee filled the air. There were only a few customers, an older couple in the corner, a man reading a newspaper at the counter, and a young waitress wiping down a table. The walls were lined with photos of the diner from the 1970s, and the jukebox in the corner played soft country music. Ethan ran ahead, pointing at a booth near the window. "Can we sit there, Mom?" he asked, grinning. I smiled. "Of course, sweetheart." As we settled in, the waitress walked over with a friendly smile that faded the moment she looked at Ethan. Her face went pale, her eyes widening as if she'd seen something impossible. For a few seconds, she just stood there frozen. "Are you okay?" I asked, a little uneasy. She blinked quickly and forced a smile. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Welcome to Hayes Family Diner. What can I get you to drink?" Her voice trembled slightly. I ordered coffee, and Ethan asked for chocolate milk, but even as she wrote it down, her eyes never left him. It wasn't the kind of look people give when they think a kid is cute. It was deeper. Shock, confusion, maybe even fear. When she walked away, I leaned across the table. "You notice how she's staring at you?" Ethan shrugged, giggling. "Maybe she thinks I'm famous." I laughed lightly, but my chest felt tight. Something about the way that waitress had reacted didn't feel right. When she came back with our drinks, she almost dropped the tray again. Ethan looked up at her, smiling. "You okay, ma'am?" he asked kindly. She stared for a moment before saying softly, "You just remind me of someone." I smiled politely. He gets that a lot. But as she walked away, I caught her whispering something under her breath. I couldn't hear what it was, but her hands were shaking as she poured coffee for another table. Ethan didn't seem to notice any of it. He was busy drawing superheroes on a napkin, his tongue poking out in concentration. Watching him made me smile. He was my whole world. After the divorce, it had been just the two of us, and moments like this made me feel like we were finally finding peace again. When the waitress returned with our food, she hesitated again. "Sorry if I'm acting strange," she said quietly. "Your son, he just looks so familiar." I tried to ease the tension. "Do you have kids?" She shook her head. "No, but I used to babysit a little boy. He had the same eyes as your son, same smile too." I smiled awkwardly. Small world, right? She didn't respond. She just stared for a moment longer before walking away, wiping her hands on her apron, her breathing quick and uneven. As we ate, I noticed other waitresses whispering near the counter and glancing our way. The old man with the newspaper kept peeking over the top of the pages. Even the cook in the back had stopped clattering pans. The whole diner had gone strangely quiet. I leaned toward Ethan. "Finish your fries, honey. We'll go soon." He looked up at me, confused. "Did we do something wrong?" "No, sweetheart," I said, forcing a smile. "Everyone's just tired. It's been a long day." But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. There was something about this place, about the way everyone looked at my son, that made the hairs on my neck stand up. When I went to pay the bill, the waitress met me at the register. Her voice was soft, trembling. "Ma'am, please don't think I'm crazy, but your son looks exactly like a boy who used to come here. His name was Jacob Hayes. He went missing 10 years ago. He was 8 years old too." I froze. Missing? You mean kidnapped? Her eyes glistened. No one ever found him. For a moment I couldn't speak. My heart started pounding in my ears. Ethan ran up beside me, clutching my hand. Mom, can we go now? The waitress looked down at him one last time, tears filling her eyes. He even talks like him, she whispered. I didn't know what to say. I just grabbed the receipt and left as fast as I could, my hands shaking as I guided Ethan out the door. As we stepped outside into the cool air, I tried to convince myself she was mistaken. A coincidence, nothing more. But even as we drove away, I couldn't stop thinking about her words. What if she wasn't wrong? If you want to find out what happened next, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The truth about what that waitress said would change everything I thought I knew about my son. The drive home after that strange dinner felt longer than usual. The silence in the car made every sound louder. The hum of the tires, the faint rattle of the air vents, Ethan softly humming to himself in the back seat. My mind was racing with what the waitress had said. He looks just like the boy who vanished here 10 years ago. The words echoed again and again, looping in my head until my stomach turned. I tried to shake it off, telling myself she was probably just mistaken. Kids looked alike all the time. But something about her face, that terrified, almost haunted look, stayed with me. It wasn't just surprise, it was recognition. When we finally pulled into the driveway, Ethan was half asleep. I carried him to bed, kissed his forehead, and turned off the light. He looked peaceful, safe. Nothing about him seemed unusual or out of place. Still, when I closed his door, I found myself double-checking the locks and peeking out the windows before heading to my room. Lying in bed, I couldn't stop replaying what had happened. Why had everyone in that diner gone silent? Why had the waitress, Sophie, her name tag said, been trembling like that? The way the older man behind the counter, the one who looked like the owner, had stared at us was just as strange. His eyes weren't curious. They were almost sad. The next morning, I woke up early, feeling restless. I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee and opened my laptop. Curiosity got the better of me. I typed, "Boy Missing Hayes Family Diner" into the search bar. It didn't take long to find it. There it was. A newspaper article from 10 years ago. The headline read, "Local Boy, Jacob Hayes, vanishes from family-owned diner. Search continues." I clicked the article, and my heart started pounding as the picture loaded. A black and white photo of a smiling boy appeared. He couldn't have been more than 8. He had the same sandy blonde hair as Ethan, the same green eyes, and even a small scar on his chin, the same one Ethan got when he fell off his bike last summer. My hands went cold. For a moment, I couldn't move. It was like looking at a photograph of my own child, just from another time. I read every word of that article. The boy had disappeared while eating dinner with his babysitter one summer evening. No witnesses, no evidence, no trace. The police had searched the entire area for weeks before declaring it a cold case. I closed the laptop and just sat there, staring at the wall. The air in the kitchen felt heavier somehow. My thoughts raced between disbelief and a creeping sense of fear. When Ethan woke up, I tried to act normal. He yawned, shuffled into the kitchen, and asked if we could have pancakes. His innocence almost broke me. I smiled and said, "Sure, buddy," trying to steady my shaking hands as I cooked. As he ate, I decided not to tell him anything. He didn't need to know about what that waitress said. It was probably just an old story anyway, but part of me couldn't let it go. I needed answers. That afternoon, when Ethan was playing in the backyard, I picked up my phone and called the diner. The same woman answered, the one who had rung us up the night before. I could tell right away it wasn't Sophie. Her voice was firm, distant. "Hi," I said. "I was there last night with my son. I was hoping to speak with Sophie, the waitress who served us." There was a pause. "Sophie's not here. Do you know when she'll be back?" "She won't," the woman said. "She quit this morning." My stomach flipped. "Did she say why?" Another pause. Then flatly, "She said she saw something she wasn't supposed to." The line went dead. I just sat there, staring at my phone, feeling my pulse pound in my ears. Something about this whole thing didn't make sense. Sophie had been terrified, and now she was gone? That night, as I tucked Ethan into bed, he looked up at me and asked something that sent chills down my spine. "Mom, why did that lady keep calling me Jacob?" I froze. "What do you mean?" "When you went to the bathroom," he said sleepily, "she told me she was happy I came back. She said I used to sit in that same booth and order apple pie." I forced a smile, but my voice cracked when I said, "She must have been confused, sweetheart. Go to sleep, okay?" He nodded, already drifting off, his small hand clutching his blanket. But I couldn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room with my laptop open, searching for anything else about that missing boy. The more I read, the worse it got. Witnesses had described hearing a faint humming sound before the boy vanished, like a tune someone was whistling. One customer claimed they saw a woman sitting with him right before he disappeared, a woman who wasn't his babysitter. She was described as being in her 30s, wearing a blue jacket and gold earrings. My eyes drifted to my reflection in the laptop screen. I was wearing a blue cardigan that night, and the same small gold earrings I always wore. For the first time, I felt a deep, primal fear that I couldn't explain. What if this wasn't just a coincidence? What if the reason everyone looked at Ethan that way was because he didn't just resemble that boy? He was him. The thought made me shiver. I closed the laptop, turned off the lights, and went to bed. But long after midnight, I woke to the faintest sound, a soft humming, a melody I didn't recognize coming from down the hall. I held my breath and listened. It was coming from Ethan's room. The next morning, sunlight poured into the kitchen, but it didn't make me feel safe. The house was quiet except for the ticking clock on the wall. I sat at the table with a cup of coffee that had already gone cold, staring at my phone. The call with the diner's staff from the day before echoed in my head. She said she saw something she wasn't supposed to. Sophie was gone. She had quit the very next morning after meeting Ethan. That wasn't a coincidence. I knew it. Something had frightened her. I couldn't ignore it anymore. The rational part of me kept saying it was all just a misunderstanding. But the other part, the one that had seen the photo of Jacob Hayes and felt her heart stop, knew I needed to find out the truth. I told myself I was doing it for peace of mind, but deep down, I was afraid of what I might discover. Ethan was still asleep, so I left him with our neighbor, Mrs. Grant, telling her I had to run an errand. I didn't tell her where. She smiled kindly and said she'd keep him busy with board games and cookies. As I drove toward the diner, I kept my hands tight on the steering wheel, my stomach twisting tighter the closer I got. When I pulled into the same parking lot, it was nearly empty again. Just 2 trucks and an old sedan. The sign above the door flickered, the paint chipped from years of sun. The moment I stepped inside, I felt it. The same strange weight in the air. The same quiet that wasn't just silence, but something else. Like the building itself was holding its breath. Mr. Hayes was behind the counter, wiping a mug. When he saw me, his expression didn't change, but I could see the recognition in his eyes. "Back again?" he asked flatly. "Yes," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I need to talk to you about what happened here. About Jacob." He froze for a second, then slowly set the mug down. "That's a name I haven't heard in a long time." "I know who he was," I said, "and I know you saw my son yesterday. You think he looks like him, don't you?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached under the counter, pulled out a small, worn photo, and placed it on the counter between us. "This was Jacob," he said quietly. I looked down. The same freckled nose, same curious eyes, same scar on the chin. My heart clenched. It was Ethan's face staring back at me from a picture taken 10 years ago. I whispered, "He looks exactly the same." Mr. Hayes's voice was heavy. "He was my grandson. He disappeared right out of this diner. His babysitter turned her head for 1 second, and he was gone. No car, no sound, no nothing. The door never opened. It was like he just vanished." He glanced around the room, lowering his voice. "Sophie was working that night. She blamed herself for years. When she saw your boy, I think she thought it was him, that somehow he'd come back." I felt a lump in my throat. "But that's impossible. My son was born 8 years ago. I was pregnant in another state. He's mine. Mr. Hayes gave me a look that made my skin crawl. Not accusing, not angry, but searching. Sometimes things don't happen the way we think they do, he said. You ever notice him saying things he shouldn't know? Remembering things that never happened? I hesitated. My mind went to the humming I'd heard in the middle of the night. The way Ethan sometimes spoke about places we'd never been. How he once said, I used to live near a big oak tree behind a diner. I'd brushed it off as imagination, but now it didn't feel so harmless. I should go, I said quickly, my pulse pounding. As I turned to leave, Mr. Hayes said something that made me stop cold. If your boy really is mine, then you can't keep him. I spun around, anger mixing with fear. He's not your grandson. He's my son. He didn't argue. He just nodded slowly, like a man who already knew he'd lost something he'd once loved. You can say that all you want, but sometimes children don't belong to the people who raise them. Sometimes they just come back to where they were meant to be. I left without another word, slamming the door behind me. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the keys into the ignition. On the drive home, I kept glancing at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something behind me, but the road was empty. When I got back, Ethan was playing on the porch with Mrs. Grant's dog. He looked up and smiled. Hi, Mom. The sound of his voice almost made me cry. I hugged him tightly, longer than I meant to. He laughed. Mom, what's wrong? Nothing, sweetheart, I whispered. I just missed you. That night, I tucked him into bed and watched him sleep. His face looked so innocent, so normal, but my thoughts wouldn't stop racing. Was this really my son? Was it possible for someone to come back, not as a ghost, but as another child entirely? Just before I turned off the light, Ethan stirred and mumbled in his sleep. His lips moved, forming words so faint I barely heard them. But when I leaned closer, I caught the whisper. I remember now. He promised he'd find me. My heart skipped a beat. Who, Ethan? Who promised? But he didn't answer. His breathing slowed, peaceful again. I stood there in the dark, staring at him, realizing that maybe the question wasn't who had promised, but who he was remembering. Whatever was happening, it was no longer about coincidence. It was about something that refused to stay buried, and I was about to find out why. The next day felt like walking through someone else's life. I couldn't focus on anything, not work, not chores, not even the sound of Ethan's laughter from the other room. Everything seemed distant, muffled, as if I were underwater. I tried to tell myself that Mr. Hayes was just an old man clinging to a painful memory, that he had convinced himself my son was his missing grandson out of grief. But deep down, I couldn't shake what Ethan had said in his sleep. I remember now. He promised he'd find me. Who was he? That night, after I tucked Ethan in, I sat on my bed scrolling through the old news articles again. There were pictures of the search teams, the empty diner, and the grieving family. I stopped at one photo of Jacob's father, standing beside Mr. Hayes, both of them looking hollow. The caption said the boy's father disappeared a year later while driving through the same county. Police never found him either. Something inside me twisted. What if these things were connected? What if whatever had taken Jacob had come back for more than one person? I was still staring at the screen when my phone buzzed. The number was unknown. I hesitated but answered. A shaky voice came through. Claire? It's Sophie. My stomach dropped. Sophie? Where are you? Why did you quit? Her breathing was uneven, like she was whispering into the phone from somewhere dark. You need to listen to me. Don't take Ethan back to the diner. Don't even drive past it. He doesn't belong here. Not in this time. I froze. What are you talking about? There was a long pause before she said, when Jacob disappeared, I was the one watching him. I turned away for 5 seconds, and he was gone. I searched everywhere, but it was like he just walked out of existence. But when your son came in yesterday, I recognized him instantly. He has the same voice, the same little freckle behind his left ear. I don't know how, but that boy is Jacob. Her words made my skin prickle. That's impossible. My son was born 8 years ago. I was there. I gave birth to him. I know what I saw, she whispered, and I think he's starting to remember. Before I could respond, the call cut off. I sat there in silence, the phone still pressed to my ear. The hum of the refrigerator and the ticking clock filled the room, but everything felt wrong. The air heavier, the light dimmer. When I finally looked up, I saw movement in the hallway. Ethan was standing there in his pajamas, staring at me. "Mom," he said softly, "why were you talking about me?" I forced a shaky smile. "It's late, sweetheart. Go back to bed." He didn't move. I dreamed about the diner again. My pulse quickened. What happened in the dream? "I was sitting in the booth," he said, his voice calm but distant. "There was another boy there. He looked like me, but older. He told me I had to go with him. He said it was time to go home." I stood up so quickly the chair scraped the floor. "Ethan, it was just a dream." He frowned slightly, tilting his head. "Mom, he called me Jacob." I felt the world tilt for a second. My knees went weak. "Honey, that's not your name." He blinked, confused. "But he said it used to be." That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the hallway outside his room, listening. The house was silent, except for the occasional creak of the old floorboards. Around 2 a.m., I heard a faint sound, humming. That same low tune I'd heard before. I went cold. It was coming from Ethan's room. I opened the door quietly. The moonlight filtered through the curtains, casting pale shadows on the walls. Ethan was sitting up in bed, humming softly, his eyes half open. "Ethan?" I whispered. He didn't respond. His gaze was fixed on the window. I followed it and froze. There was someone standing outside, a man, tall, motionless, his face hidden in the shadows. He was looking straight into the window, straight at Ethan. I rushed to the window and yanked the curtain closed. My heart pounded in my chest as I turned back to my son, but he was already lying down, eyes closed, as if nothing had happened. The humming stopped. I stayed awake until morning, too afraid to move. When the sun rose, I went outside, trembling, to check the yard. There were footprints in the dirt near the window, large ones, like a man's, and smaller ones beside them, bare feet. Ethan came outside a few minutes later, rubbing his eyes. "Mom, what are you looking at?" I forced a calm voice. "Just some animal tracks." He smiled faintly. "I had another dream." The man came back. He said he missed me. I swallowed hard. What did he look like? Ethan thought for a moment. Like the picture in the diner. I knew he meant Jacob's father, the man who had disappeared a year after his son. I couldn't stay silent anymore. I called the police, explained everything. The waitress, the resemblance, the dreams, the man outside. The officer on the line was polite but distant. "Ma'am, children sometimes repeat things they overhear. I'm sure there's an explanation." But there wasn't. That night, I locked every door, every window, and kept Ethan in my room. He fell asleep easily, but I didn't. I sat up all night staring at the clock, waiting for something to happen. At exactly 2:13 a.m., the power went out. The house plunged into darkness. I grabbed the flashlight from the nightstand and flicked it on, my hands trembling. The beam landed on Ethan's bed, empty. My breath caught. "Ethan?" No answer. I ran through the house, calling his name. The front door was wide open, cold air rushing in. I ran outside, barefoot, my heart racing. The yard was empty, except for one thing. In the dirt by the driveway were 2 sets of footprints again, one small, one large, leading toward the woods. I followed them until they stopped near the edge of the trees. There, carved into the bark of an old oak, were 2 initials, J.H. I fell to my knees, shaking. "Ethan!" I screamed into the trees, but my voice echoed back empty. Then I heard it, faint, distant, but clear. A child's laughter, and then silence. The police searched the woods until sunrise. They brought dogs, flashlights, and drones, but there was nothing. No footprints, no torn clothing, not even a sign of struggle. It was as if Ethan had vanished into thin air, just like Jacob Hayes had. I sat on the back of an ambulance wrapped in a blanket, my hands shaking uncontrollably. The officers asked the same questions over and over, but I barely heard them. I just kept staring into the trees, hoping I'd see a flash of movement, a hint of my little boy's voice calling out, "Mom, I'm here." But the forest stayed silent. When the sun finally rose, the chief of police came over. his voice low and careful. Mrs. Dawson, we'll keep searching, but are you sure your son didn't run away? Kids sometimes wander. I turned to him slowly, my eyes red. My son didn't wander off. Someone took him. I saw the footprints. He hesitated, clearly not believing me. There's a storm coming tonight. We'll bring in more units tomorrow. Tomorrow. The word felt cruel. My son was gone now, not tomorrow. The hours passed in a blur. By noon, the search teams had pulled back because of the rain.